Stop scrolling. Look at these 4 masks. Study them carefully. Mask 1, the Golden Emperor, gleaming, crowned, radiant. Mask 2, the Silver Diplomat, smooth, subtle, elegant. Mask 3, the Iron Warrior, scarred, brutal, unyielding. Mask 4, the Shadow Manipulator, dark, featureless, hidden. Choose one. Don't overthink it. Your first instinct matters more than your analysis. Your choice reveals something you've been hiding from yourself and from your enemies. In 1513, Niccolò Machiavelli developed a secret system to identify which rulers would survive the brutal politics of Renaissance Italy and which would fall screaming from power. He never published this test, but he used it on every prince, duke, and king he advised. The pattern he discovered was so dangerous, so revealing, that he coded it into symbols, into masks, into archetypes that expose your deepest strategic nature. Today I'm decoding his system for you. Comment your choice right now. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Do it before I reveal what it means, because once you understand your Machiavellian archetype, you can never unsee it. Let me take you back to Florence, 1513. Niccolò Machiavelli had just been tortured, stripped of his position, exiled from the city he'd served for 14 years. While imprisoned, strapped to the strappato, a torture device that dislocated shoulders, he had hours to do nothing but observe human nature under extreme stress. He noticed something the other prisoners missed. When facing death, people revealed their true strategic nature, not the masks they wore in public, not the virtues they claimed to possess. Their survival instinct exposed their core archetype. After his release, he wrote The Prince, but that was the public version, the sanitized version designed to win back political favor. In his private letters, in coded passages his contemporaries couldn't decipher, he documented something far more dangerous, the 4 masks of power. He realized that every effective ruler, every person who achieved lasting power, instinctively wore one of 4 masks. Not consciously, not deliberately. Their subconscious chose the mask that matched their strategic nature. 400 years later, Carl Jung would call these archetypes, unconscious patterns that govern behavior. But Machiavelli understood them first, and he understood them strategically. Because here's what Machiavelli discovered that Jung never fully grasped. Your archetype determines your vulnerability. Every mask has a strength. Every strength creates a weakness. And your enemies, conscious or not, will instinctively attack that weakness. Unless you know which mask you wear, you're fighting blind. You're broadcasting your weakness to everyone who knows how to read the code. In chapter 18 of The Prince, Machiavelli wrote this: "A prince must know how to use both the nature of the beast and that of man. Therefore, he must know how to use both natures, and that the one without the other is not lasting." What he meant was this: you must understand your primal archetype, the mask your subconscious wears in the war for survival. You chose your mask instinctively at the beginning of this video. Now, let me reveal what it means, and more importantly, let me reveal the strategic weakness your choice just exposed. We'll go through each mask, each archetype, each power pattern. If you chose mask 1, skip to the next section. If you chose mask 2, 3, or 4, stay anyway. Because understanding all 4 archetypes means you can identify the masks your rivals wear. And identification is the first step to exploitation. Let's begin. Mask 1, the Golden Emperor. If you chose mask 1, the Golden Emperor, you carry what Machiavelli called the hunger for visible dominion. You don't want power in the shadows. You want the crown, the throne, the recognition, the authority that everyone can see. This isn't vanity, it's strategy. Your subconscious understands that visible power, legitimate authority, is the most sustainable form of control. In modern terms, you're the CEO who sits at the head of the table, the general who wears the medals, the leader whose name is on the building. You lead through presence. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 19, "A prince should make himself feared in such a way that if he does not gain love, he at any rate avoids hatred." This is your operating principle. You understand that respect matters more than affection. That authority requires visibility, that people follow the leader they can see. But here's what Machiavelli discovered about the emperor archetype, and this is what will destroy you if you don't adapt. Visible power attracts visible enemies. Let me tell you about Julius Caesar. Caesar was the perfect embodiment of the emperor archetype. He conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, defeated Pompey, declared himself dictator for life. He wore the laurel crown. He sat on the golden chair. He paraded through Rome with Cleopatra while the mob cheered his name. Caesar needed to be seen, needed the visible symbols of power. And on March 15th, 44 BC, in the theater of Pompey, his visibility killed him. 23 senators surrounded him. 23 knives found their mark. Why? Because everyone knew he was the threat. Everyone could see the power concentration. Everyone understood that removing Caesar meant removing the obstacle. Visibility creates targets. John F. Kennedy in the open limousine. Abraham Lincoln in the theater box. Indira Gandhi walking to the interview. The emperor archetype makes you magnificent, and magnificence makes you a bullseye. But here's the strategic adaptation Machiavelli prescribed, and this is what separates the emperors who survive from the Caesars who fall. You must be the emperor everyone sees while maintaining an invisible intelligence network that maps every conspiracy before it forms. Queen Elizabeth I understood this perfectly. She wore the elaborate gowns, the crown, the public majesty. She was the emperor in every visible sense. But she also employed Francis Walsingham, her spy master, who ran the most sophisticated intelligence network in Europe. Every plot against Elizabeth was detected and crushed before it materialized. Not because of her guards, not because of her army, because she knew that visible power without invisible information equals assassination. In modern terms, this means be the CEO with the corner office, but personally control the IT security. Know who's sending what emails. Be the general with the medals, but maintain direct relationships with the enlisted intelligence officers, not just the visible chain of command. Be the leader on stage, but have sources in every department who report conspiracies directly to you, bypassing all formal channels. Machiavelli's advice for the emperor archetype appears in chapter 23. A prince should always take counsel, but only when he wishes, not when others wish. He should prevent anyone from offering him unsolicited advice, but he should be a frequent questioner. This means control the information flow, question everyone, trust your intelligence more than your advisor's public statements. If you are the emperor, then your survival depends on pairing visibility with surveillance. Wear the crown in public, but know every conspiracy in private. If you chose mask one, if you instinctively gravitated toward visible authority, toward legitimate leadership, toward the power everyone can recognize, then comment below, "I am the emperor." Claim your archetype, because understanding that you lead through presence means you can weaponize visibility instead of dying from it. Mask 2, the Silver Diplomat. If you chose Mask 2, the Silver Diplomat, you carry what Machiavelli called the art of strategic ambiguity. You don't command through authority. You don't conquer through force. You don't hide in shadows. You survive through adaptation. Your power is flexibility. Your strategy is to never be locked into a single position, never committed to one alliance, never predictable enough to target. Machiavelli wrote about this archetype in chapter 21, though he disguised it as advice about foreign policy. A prince is also esteemed when he is a true friend or a true enemy. That is, when he declares himself without reservation in favor of one side or against another. But then, in the same chapter, he contradicts himself. This apparent contradiction is deliberate. Machiavelli is describing the diplomat, the ruler who must balance alliances, shift positions, and survive by never being the primary target. In Renaissance Italy, this was the Medici family strategy. Cosimo de' Medici never wore a crown. He never declared himself ruler of Florence. He never conquered territories through military force. But for decades, he was the most powerful man in Italy. How? He financed everyone. He lent money to popes, kings, merchants, and rival families. He made himself indispensable without making himself threatening. When the Pazzi family tried to overthrow the Medici in 1478, they assassinated Giuliano de' Medici, but Lorenzo de' Medici survived. Why? Because Lorenzo had cultivated relationships with every major power in Italy. No single faction could afford to let him die, because they all owed him favors, money, or political capital. The diplomat archetype doesn't win through dominance. The diplomat wins through necessity. You make yourself the bridge, the connector, the person everyone needs but no one fears. In modern terms, you're the executive who sits on 5 different boards, the consultant who advises competing companies, the investor who backs multiple startups in the same space. You don't pick sides permanently. You maintain options. Your strength is survival. Emperors fall. Warriors lose battles. Shadows get exposed. But diplomats endure because they're never the primary threat. But here's what Machiavelli discovered about the diplomat archetype, and this is what will destroy you if you don't adapt. Strategic ambiguity creates strategic loneliness. People don't trust you. They work with you. They rely on you. They negotiate with you, but they don't die for you, because you've never shown them that you would die for them. Niccolò Machiavelli himself was a diplomat. He served the Florentine Republic. Then he served the Medici after they returned to power. Then he tried to advise both sides during political transitions. And when the final crisis came, when Florence needed to choose between French and Spanish alliances, Machiavelli's flexibility became his liability. No one trusted his advice because everyone remembered he had served their enemies. He died in political obscurity, not because he was incompetent, but because diplomacy without loyalty equals isolation. If you are the diplomat, then your survival depends on selective commitment. You cannot be loyal to everyone. You cannot be neutral forever. At some point, you must anchor yourself to one relationship, one principle, one alliance that defines you even when everything else shifts. Machiavelli's corrective advice appears in chapter 21. A prince should show himself a lover of merit, and should honor those who excel in every art. In other words, find the people who are genuinely excellent, not politically useful, but actually competent, and commit to them. Let everyone else remain flexible, but have one core circle that knows you will never betray them. That's the difference between strategic ambiguity and strategic abandonment. If you chose Mask 2, if you instinctively gravitated toward flexibility, toward maintaining options, toward surviving through adaptation, then comment below, "I am the diplomat." Claim your archetype. Because understanding that you survive through relationships means you can build strategic loyalty instead of dying alone. Mask 3, the Iron Warrior. If you chose Mask 3, the Iron Warrior, you carry what Machiavelli called virtù through force. You don't manipulate, you don't negotiate, you don't hide, you act. Your power is decisiveness. Your strategy is overwhelming strength, applied precisely and without hesitation. Where diplomats build consensus, you impose solutions. Where emperors project authority, you demonstrate capability. Where shadows manipulate from darkness, you strike in daylight and dare anyone to respond. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the warrior archetype, but his clearest expression appears in chapter 14. A prince should have no other object, nor any other thought, nor take anything else as his art but that of war and its orders and discipline. This is not literal. Machiavelli is not saying you must be a soldier. He's saying, your default response to problems must be direct action, not planning, not persuasion, not politics, execution. Cesare Borgia was the perfect embodiment of the warrior archetype. When Cesare needed to consolidate power in the Romagna region, he didn't negotiate with the local lords. He didn't bribe them. He didn't build alliances. He conquered them. When his own commanders conspired against him, he didn't investigate. He didn't gather evidence. He didn't build a legal case. He invited them to a peace conference in Senegalia and had them all strangled. Machiavelli witnessed this personally and described it in The Prince as an example of decisive brutality. This affair, well considered, gave Cesare Borgia a great reputation. Why? Because the warrior archetype earns respect through demonstrated capacity for violence. Not actual violence, most of the time, but the absolute certainty that if pushed, you will respond with overwhelming force. In modern terms, you're the CEO who fires entire departments without warning, the executive who shuts down underperforming divisions immediately, the leader who makes one swift, brutal decision that everyone else was too afraid to make. You don't tolerate incompetence. You don't accept excuses. You don't wait for consensus. You identify the problem and you eliminate it. Your strength is clarity. In a crisis, when speed matters more than perfection, you win. While diplomats are still negotiating and shadows are still plotting, you've already solved the problem. But here's what Machiavelli discovered about the warrior archetype, and this is what will destroy you if you don't adapt. Direct force creates direct enemies, and eventually, those enemies will unite against you. Cesare Borgia conquered half of Italy through sheer military capability. He was unstoppable, until his father, Pope Alexander VI, died unexpectedly. Within months, every enemy Cesare had defeated, every lord he had humiliated, every rival he had crushed, they all allied against him simultaneously. Cesare's strength was his army, but armies require money, logistics, and political support. The moment he lost his base of power, his strength evaporated. He went from conqueror to prisoner in less than a year. Why? Because the warrior makes enemies faster than friends. Direct action creates resentment. Decisive brutality creates revenge fantasies. Overwhelming force creates coalitions designed specifically to contain you. Napoleon Bonaparte made the same mistake on a grander scale. He conquered most of Europe through military genius. He was the warrior archetype perfected. But every nation he defeated eventually joined the coalition against him. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, Spain, not because they agreed on anything else, but because they agreed that Napoleon was the existential threat. The warrior wins battles, but the warrior loses wars when every other power unites against them. If you are the warrior, then your survival depends on selective brutality paired with strategic restraint. You cannot crush every problem. You must learn to recognize which battles to fight and which enemies to ignore. Machiavelli's corrective advice appears in Chapter 20. A prince should consider how to avoid those things which will make him hated or despised. In other words, force is your strength, but hated strength creates unified opposition. Use force decisively when necessary, but don't use force as your default response to every challenge. Be capable of overwhelming violence. Be known for that capacity, but don't actually deploy it constantly. The most dangerous warriors are the ones who have demonstrated brutal capability once, and then rarely use it again because the reputation alone is sufficient. If you chose Mask 3, if you instinctively gravitated toward direct action, toward decisive force, toward solving problems through strength rather than strategy, then comment below, "I am the warrior." Claim your archetype, because understanding that you lead through force means you can weaponize restraint instead of dying from overextension. Mask 4, the Shadow Manipulator. If you chose Mask 4, the Shadow Manipulator, you carry what Machiavelli called the invisible hand of power. You don't want the crown, You don't need recognition. You don't care about visible authority. You want control without attribution. Your power is influence. Your strategy is to shape outcomes while remaining invisible to the targets of your manipulation. Machiavelli never explicitly described the shadow archetype in The Prince, because to do so would violate the fundamental principle of shadow power. The moment it's named, it loses effectiveness. But he understood it. In Chapter 18, buried in advice about appearing virtuous while acting ruthlessly, Machiavelli wrote, "Therefore it is unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities I have enumerated, but it is very necessary to appear to have them." This is shadow doctrine. Reality and perception are separate battlefields. You control reality. You let others control perception. Let emperors be visible. Let warriors be respected. Let diplomats be essential. You'll be the one deciding which emperor wears the crown, which warrior wins the battle, and which diplomat survives the next political shift. Cardinal Richelieu perfected the shadow archetype. Officially, he was the chief minister to King Louis XIII of France. The king ruled, Richelieu advised, but in practice, every major decision, every war, every alliance, every execution, Richelieu decided. How did he maintain power for 18 years while serving a weak king, surrounded by ambitious nobles who wanted him dead? He made himself structurally necessary. He didn't control the king through threats. He controlled the king through administrative systems that only Richelieu understood. He didn't eliminate rivals through visible assassinations. He created legal frameworks that made his enemies eliminate each other. When the Duke of Montmorency rebelled against the crown, Richelieu didn't personally order his execution. He convinced the Parliament of Toulouse that the law demanded it. When Marie de Medici, the Queen Mother, tried to remove Richelieu, he didn't fight her directly. He convinced Louis XIV that his mother was undermining royal authority. Shadow power operates through structure, not spectacle. You create the system, you design the rules, you set the incentives, and then you let the system produce the outcomes you engineered, while everyone else thinks they're making their own decisions. In modern terms, you're the executive assistant who controls the CEO's calendar, the middle manager who decides which projects get funded, the board member who shapes every decision through questions rather than commands. You don't give orders. You create situations where the order you want is the only logical conclusion. Your strength is invisibility. You can't be targeted because you're never identified as the threat. While emperors are being attacked and warriors are being contained, you're reshaping the battlefield itself. But here's what Machiavelli discovered about the shadow archetype. And this is what will destroy you if you don't adapt. Invisible power is inherently unstable because it requires constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant manipulation. The moment you stop controlling every variable, the system reveals that you were the architect, and everyone turns on you simultaneously. Richelieu died in power, but he died exhausted, paranoid, and universally hated. His spy network, which he personally managed, required reviewing thousands of intercepted letters. His political manipulations required tracking dozens of simultaneous schemes. His survival depended on never sleeping, never relaxing, never trusting anyone. He won every battle, but he lost his humanity. Joseph Fouché, Napoleon's police minister, made the same mistake. Fouché survived the French Revolution, the Directory, the Consulate, Napoleon's empire, and the Bourbon Restoration. 5 regime changes, 1 survivor. Because he maintained intelligence files on everyone. He knew every secret. He manipulated every faction. But when he finally fell from power, no one defended him, because no one had ever been his genuine ally. Shadow players control everyone, but they connect with no one. If you are the shadow, then your survival depends on selective vulnerability. You cannot manipulate everyone forever. You must have one relationship, one person, one principle, one commitment, where you are genuine. Not because it's strategically optimal, but because shadow power without human connection eventually destroys the person wielding it. Machiavelli himself never fully solved this problem, but he hinted at it in his personal letters, where he wrote to his friend Francesco Vittori with genuine emotion and unguarded honesty. Those letters are the only place where Machiavelli stopped manipulating and started living. Find your Francesco Vittori, one person who knows your real thoughts, one relationship where you're not playing the game. That person becomes your anchor to reality, your defense against the paranoia and isolation that shadow power inevitably creates. If you chose Mask 4, if you felt drawn to invisibility, to manipulation without attribution, to power without responsibility, then comment below, "I am the shadow." Claim your archetype, because understanding that you operate in darkness means you can use shadows strategically instead of hiding instinctively. The counter-archetype warning. You now know your Machiavellian archetype, the emperor, the diplomat, the warrior, the shadow. But here's what I haven't told you yet. And this is what Machiavelli coded into the prince so subtly that scholars still miss it. Every archetype has a predator archetype. The emperor fears the shadow. Invisible enemies they cannot strike. The diplomat fears the warrior. Direct action that breaks social structures. The warrior fears the diplomat. Manipulation that avoids strength. The shadow fears the emperor. Legitimate authority that exposes hidden operations. This is the strategic cycle Machiavelli never wrote down explicitly, but it appears in the structure of the prince itself. Why did Caesar fall? Because he was an emperor attacked by shadows. The senators plotted invisibly until striking suddenly. Why did Richelieu survive assassination attempts? Because he was a shadow who legitimized himself. He gained institutional authority that made him immune to exposure. Why did Cesare Borgia ultimately lose his territories? Because he was a warrior attacked by diplomats. The Italian city-states allied against him, avoiding direct confrontation. Why did Cosimo de' Medici die peacefully in his bed, one of the richest and most powerful men in Europe? Because he was a diplomat who never antagonized warriors directly. He financed their wars instead of fighting them. Understanding your archetype is step 1. Understanding your vulnerability to the counter-archetype is step 2. If you are the emperor, your power is visible legitimacy. Your weakness is invisible conspiracy. Your defense, build shadow networks while maintaining emperor presence. If you are the diplomat, your power is social manipulation. Your weakness is direct force that breaks social structures. Your defense, align with warriors who protect your networks. If you are the warrior, your power is intimidating strength. Your weakness is indirect manipulation that avoids confrontation. Your defense, force diplomats into binary choices where your strength applies. If you are the shadow, your power is invisible control. Your weakness is legitimate authority that exposes hidden operations. Your defense, never antagonize emperors, manipulate around them instead. Machiavelli understood these patterns because he lived through them. He served emperors who fell to conspiracy. He advised diplomats who were crushed by military force. He documented warriors who were destroyed by alliances they never saw forming. He watched shadows get exposed and executed when their invisibility failed. And he wrote it all down, coded into seemingly simple political advice. But now you have the key. You know which mask you wear. You know which mask hunts you. And you know how to defend against your predator while hunting your prey. Comment your archetype one more time. I am the emperor. I am the diplomat. I am the warrior. I am the shadow. Like the video if you loved it and subscribe to this channel. Claim your mask. Because this isn't a personality test. This is a strategic diagnostic. Machiavelli wrote The Prince to teach rulers how to survive. I'm decoding his system to teach you how to survive. How to identify which mask your enemies wear, and how to destroy each archetype specifically. The Emperor's assassination protocol, the diplomat's exposure technique, the warrior's indirect defeat strategy, the Shadow's forced revelation method. Machiavelli didn't just teach defense, he taught offense. And offense means knowing how to kill each archetype before they kill you. Until then, study your mask, watch for your predator, and remember, in the game of power, you're either learning the rules or suffering them. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But it is best to be invisible until you strike. Choose wisely. I'll see you in the next revelation.